Hey guys, this video is going to be a little different than my usual playthrough videos. One, because it's the beta and new update, and two, because there's quite a bit less action and excitement than my usual. But if you happen to be interested in action and excitement, check out one of my Build 41 movies. Also, I wanted to take this time to explain more about why Build 42 is easy, and to give something of a guide on how I do things, so that maybe others can find it easier to survive too. So if you're looking for a taste of what Build 42 is like, with some guidance and commentary, then this video is for you. For my future runs, I'll probably make a highly customized sandbox, or if I can, I'll continue my epic Build 41 playthrough, when and if that becomes possible. But for now, we'll be talking about Build 42, with its stock apocalypse settings and what that's like. Many aspects of the game did, in fact, get harder, more nuanced, or simply unfamiliar after the update, which does increase the challenge of survival, like the fact that it gets so dark at night now creates a more challenging environment than Build 41's. But those kind of changes are mitigated by the rebalanced Zeds, which are less challenging and less of a hurdle to your survival than they would seem. But without getting bogged down in the details, we'll get into the playthrough and talk about things as we go. Now, I haven't really dialed in my build yet, but I went with an approximation of my usual firefighter with max strength and fitness, only with less of the bells and whistles you could get in Build 41. I consider max strength a basic quality of life requirement for the carry weight alone, and that's basically how I choose the rest of my traits, except for Smoker. I consider Smoker lore appropriate. And I avoid the most annoying traits simply because if you take them, the game kind of becomes annoying. Some of these include Restless Sleeper, Hemophobic, and Hearty Appetite. I would heavily recommend not taking these. While we're here though, I have to mention my thoughts on the nearsighted trait. It used to be free points, but now I'd say it's firmly in the do not take category. Unless you want to roleplay as someone who wears glasses, of course. But it would no longer be a quote-unquote meta trait to take. First, because you actually can't see well without glasses now. Second, because it apparently affects your aim with firearms. But third, and most importantly, is that it kind of prevents you from wearing other forms of face strip, and I just can't have that. Moving on to location, I chose Muldraugh because it's my favorite vanilla town, and it just received a dramatic new facelift. In brief, the new Muldraugh is awesome, and I highly recommend it. But difficulty-wise, I found it to be something like an easier form of Build 41's Rosewood, if that's even possible. But this is still the unstable beta, so we'll have to take our experiences with a grain of salt. I suppose to begin at the very beginning, my absolute first run was cut short
by death.
And it really was because of a bug with the beta that I wasn't able to sleep in chairs, which led to some insurmountable difficulties, and I ended up becoming that snack in the back room of a gas station. Oh well, and we'll just run it back, I guess. Now, my first real run began on the northern side of Muldraugh, which turned out to be not very populated. Right off the bat, with none too many Zeds around to challenge me, things were pretty easy. I'll say that simply knocking the Zeds over and stomping in their craniums is the best way to deal with them in the early game. This preserves your energy, muscle strain, and your weapons, and is just generally a faster way to kill them when you're first starting. Now, the first thing to do in any run, really, is to establish a foothold somewhere. If you have a mind to survive somewhere specifically, you should probably head there as soon as you can and start clearing out Zeds. I usually just start clearing Zeds in my immediate vicinity and make that place safe, and worry about location later. The rule of thumb is to pick a place on the outskirts of town because it's safer and easier to survive there. Now at this point, if you're really new to the game, you might have the temptation to loot everything that you can, but this is totally unnecessary, so stop it. We'll become hoarders later, but for now, you don't need 20 pounds of canned food on you, for every other random thing you somehow find. And we'll get to the important things you'll want to prioritize in your looting adventures later, you lousy criminal. But for your first few days, as far as I'm concerned, you might say that less is more. As far as food goes, you practically don't need to carry any of it on you, because everywhere you go, there will be more food, and you can just eat what's there while you're there. That's the most efficient and sensible thing to do. In fact, with the new build, food is even more abundant than ever, because you can often find a few days worth of food inside of vehicles now. So if you're hungry, don't sleep on looting the vehicles you come across. But seriously, don't worry about food. You can probably survive through winter on nothing but the ready-to-eat food you'll find just laying around, without needing to fish, farm, hunt, or even churn butter, which is something you can do now. As far as water goes, your first priority should be locating a water container, of any kind at all, and just keeping it filled. And once you do find that water container, your water needs are pretty much taken care of, until the water cuts out. Also, with the new build, keeping yourself hydrated with cans of soda and other forms of hydration are now more impactful than they used to be. I've found that if a bottle of water runs dry, you can easily survive off a can of soda for a day or longer, and those are pretty easy to find when you need one. One more thing about food, water, and loot. I want you to think about it like this. If you're playing single player, you're the only person in the world. Everything already belongs to you. And if you can get into a location once, you can usually get back into it again later. Which means you don't have to take everything with you every time. Anyways, this location I found myself in, I already knew pretty well. And I had an idea of where I would sleep for the first night. But honestly, any of these houses in the area probably would have been safe to sleep at, especially with how few Zeds were around. And that's generally true for all of time in the Project Zomboid world. If you clear a location and there's no zomboids outside of it, and you aren't making a bunch of noise or anything, you can probably sleep there. But generally, something with 2 stories and curtains is preferable, just to be on the safe side. Now this location out here is one of those locations people always make those videos about as a best base location, Muldraugh edition, because it's on the edge of town like I've mentioned, and also because it comes already fenced in. But I ended up passing my first night in the last house on the road, which is more open to its surroundings, but it comes with a basement and a second story. Either of these places would make fine base locations, but ultimately I would end up basing somewhere else. For my second day, I continued exploring the area and clearing Zeds as I went. I do believe that for long-term survival, it's best to proceed slowly and expand your area of influence incrementally by clearing everything that you see, as you see it. This gives you a kind of safe zone you can always retreat to if you happen to get in trouble or get injured and need a safe space to recuperate. Now you can always skip clearing Zeds and just go for the loot, which is incidentally a little easier now in build 42, but that's also a riskier thing to do and can potentially get you into run-ending situations. Anyways, now that I had a relatively safe place to sleep and some basic weapons, the next thing I really needed was a backpack, and maybe a vehicle. Once you get a vehicle, then I recommend becoming a pack rat. A working vehicle is a massive power spike. So, as a side note, if for some reason you're looking to make your runs more challenging or easy, you can always customize the sandbox up or down with regards to vehicle rarity, condition, fuel, and so on. I'll add here that in these first days I actually spent more time than I should have dealing with loot, even after everything I just said. Old habits die hard, I guess. I was bringing stuff back to my house and dumping it on the floor, which is the approved Project Zomboid loot sorting meta. But to kind of prove my point from before, I didn't end up basing here, and I never really returned for any of this loot because I didn't need it. The simple fact of it is, You can always find another of something else you think you need or can't live without, or you'll find that you can live without whatever it was just fine. The exception to this might be skill books and magazines, but if you're carrying around a bunch of level 5 skill books with you in your first week, stop it. All you really need is your water bottle, your weapons, some meds, cigarettes and lighter if you're a smoker, and definitely a flashlight and batteries with the new build. You never want to get caught out in the dark without a working flashlight now, unless maybe you take the cat's eyes trait. But I haven't tried it out yet, so I can't say too much about that one. Speaking of traits, I'll take this time to add that I highly recommend the wakeful trait. I almost find the game unplayable without it. In brief, wakeful makes it so that you only need 3 hours of sleep a night, but it also does so much more than that. In general, being tired in the apocalypse is very bad. And if you don't take wakeful, it seems like you get tired all of the time. And being tired is a very oppressive moodal debuff. For one thing, it makes endurance regeneration much slower, which makes you less combat effective, which in turn slows you down and can lead to some run-ending situations. And now you might be asking yourself, why hasn't he mentioned the TV? Well, I guess it's a time for another of my hot takes. I don't usually bother with watching the TV during the first week of the apocalypse. That's why I haven't mentioned it. It's true you can get a leg up on your skills this way, but I don't like being chained to the TV at specific times of the day, and I don't necessarily find it so useful that this approach is mandatory. Like if you survive for a long time, all you're gonna have is time. There's no rush, is what I'm saying. And is being able to craft a water collector really gonna stop you from fucking up and getting a laceration that puts that very bad, no good, ugly green moodle up in the corner of your screen? No, probably not. Also, it's just that if you aren't able to read the skill books before you watch these shows, you're actually leaving free gains on the table. And I don't know about you, but I prefer more gains to less gains. What I usually do instead, and this is especially easy if you're playing Apocalypse mode, because VHS tapes are easy to come by, is I don't watch a TV show until after I've read the skill book. Even if I have to wait until the power's gone out and I've found a generator and know how to operate it, I still wait. This way you get the most bang for your buck. Either approach is fine, but I don't like to spend my first days reading and watching TV. And it's kind of annoying to invest that time that way, only to get infected like the very next day. No, instead, I prefer to make sure that I can survive first, and then I invest time in my skills. But that's enough on that topic. For the third day, I decided to test out the new gun mechanics. If you've already tried Build 42, you know that the devs give you a pistol and some magazines to start with. Without being too long-winded about this, I'll just say that I didn't like the new aim mechanics, especially at first. And I kind of still don't like them now, if I'm being honest. The crosshair just feels a little out of place to me, and the fact that it doesn't work the way crosshairs usually work is annoying. Meaning that just because your crosshair is on target, you won't necessarily hit anything, which is something I find difficult to enjoy. You'll still need to use a shotgun to level up your aim before becoming effective with other guns. In my humblest opinion, I think the thing to do about this gameplay mechanic is to make 3 sandbox options customizable to the player. One that reverts to the Build 41 style, which I happen to enjoy. Another that removes the aim skill from the game entirely and makes crosshairs work in a 1-to-1 fashion, meaning your aim skill as a gamer will determine your aiming skill in Project Zomboid, which I don't think would be a bad thing even if it would somewhat dramatically change the nature of gunplay in Project Zomboid and then everything else about Project Zomboid as a consequence. You could potentially become a gunslinging god in PZ with this change, which some people would love and others would hate. The third option would be to leave it as it is, but with some fine tuning because it's still sort of awkward and clumsy. For instance, I more than once had trouble shooting things that were directly in front of me with the way the character looks and moves while aiming. Again, this is still just a beta, and it will probably work out in the end. But I'm still just not into it and very set in my Build 41 ways. Change is hard. Anyways, moving on. For the rest of the day, I continued making my way towards the highway side of town, and had some of my first moments of being excited about Build 42 in Muldraugh's new facelift. As far as the aesthetics, atmosphere, immersion, and those sort of things go, Build 42 is an almost unprecedented leap forward. When I first saw this electrical wiring on the outside of this house, and it's a small thing, I know, but I kind of geeked out about it. This little detail in itself is representative of how much depth has gone into the retouched world. It's extensive. Almost every surface, item, and location in Muldraugh looks to have been updated, and it's done wonders for the immersion and the general aesthetic vibe of Project Zomboid. I mean, the game looks fucking great now. Like, I halfway like playing it just to look at shit. And it's a 2D game that looks like it's from the early 90s. I mean, come on. Even the goddamn grass looks good now. Like, what the fuck? And the bushes, which now act like trees, by the way. You can even get your car stuck in them. I'm excited about what they could have in store for world erosion as we make deep runs into this totally revitalized world. These things in this update have made the world of Project Zomboid, which I have already very, very thoroughly explored, seem genuinely worth rediscovering all over again. And after a couple of weeks with the game now, I still believe that. Speaking of boarded up houses, these have always been important to visit, but they're a little different now. In this one, I happened to find my first backpack, which is good, but in other ones later I'd also find important recipes and other useful odds and ends. They aren't just the weapon and canned food repositories that they used to be. Man, a lot happened on day 3 and I kinda wish I could get through it faster, but I can't seem to stop finding things to ramble on about. Briefly, I'll say that this location, which has always had a garden, got a nice touch up. Notice that even the scarecrow mannequin is updated. And now, there's even a chicken complete with its chicken coop too, and logs with actual logs in them. In Build 41, these logs weren't usually a good source of wood, believe it or not, because they sometimes had a log or two, but the time invested searching them wasn't usually worth the reward. And now it is. And I'll say here that some sort of weight-reducing mod for wood and other things is a quality of life thing you might think about getting. Some people probably think logs being heavy is realistic, which it is, but dealing with logs in the game as it is now is a bit too tedious to really enjoy. For instance, I couldn't stack 4 logs together in a bundle because they were too heavy to all be picked up. Now granted, that wasn't an issue in 41 and will probably get fixed, but dealing with logs and planks in general has always been a pain in the ass in Project Zomboid. A big one. So I'd say, save yourself the headache and just get a mod. I've been using this one, Material Weight Reducer. It seems to work fine. Anyways, I spent that night on location, following my own advice from earlier, in another boarded up house that belonged to the garden, and in it I was excited to find some new armor. Personally, I'm a fan of these rolled up magazine armors. I think they look cool. I never thought I would consider reading material as drip, but here we are. And by the way, has anyone noticed that the new high strength characters look kind of jacked? I mean, look at them. He's fucking Jack Diesel. And I don't think I've mentioned it, but there was a new customized van in the driveway, so I'm glad to say vehicles have been getting some love. But honestly, they haven't gotten enough love. Now, that's okay because there happens to be a million car mods out for Project Zomboid, not all of them ported to Build 42 yet, but if you care about immersion, I can happily attest to the fact that Vanilla Vehicles Animated is up and running, and you might want to check it out. And since this is getting kind of long-winded now, I'm gonna chop it up here and just release this as a part 1. I should be able to get these out fairly quickly, so stay tuned for the next one, which is actually just going to be about combat, specifically fence fighting, because I think people are interested in that. Anyways, I hope some of you somehow found this useful. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or tips for the new early game grind that you'd like to share with us, please do so in the comments. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.